Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Vivid Voltage, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using the code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at an exciting one prize archetype from the new Vivid Voltage set. It's going to be the new way of playing Tool Drop. It's going to be Whimsicott. And the basic concept is really that we have very decent damage output for just one energy attachment from this Whimsicott, doing up to 250 damage output by discarding 6 tools all at once. And the fact that we have U-turn board in the format means that in many ways we can recover this damage. As long as you don't get hand disrupted, that's an immediate 170 damage that you can put right back into play if you found all 4 of your U-turn board, which is a really nice bragging right to have for this very simple to set up one energy attacker. At the same time, we have other benefits of tools in general. You know, people play tools in all sorts of decks, but we just happen to have extra synergy here, which means on certain turns you can have Lucky Egg usage. Vitality Band as well can help push into really good damage for specifically some tag teams, which we'll get into later. Starting off with the Pokemon then, we have the Unified Minds Cottonee, which seems to be the best one because it can simply draw you one card for a colorless. But the Whimsicott is obviously the new card that we're looking at here. It has 2 attacks. The first is Triple Draw, which isn't too shabby in a pinch, especially when your damage output can scale so nicely in certain situations. You may just want to sacrifice a Whimsicott to draw a few extra cards to get your combo rolling, but Flying Fury really is the most important attack here. For 1 Psychic, you do 10 base, and you may discard any number of tools from your Pokemon. This attack does 40 for each you discarded, so obviously we can have a total of 6 Pokemon in play. That's 240, plus the 10 base damage output there. So 250, really solid number. It's not quite enough to push on tag teams, but we do play Vitality Band to get us to 260, and obviously this is an attack cost of Psychic, so we do play Horror Psychics in here, so if they are hitting into you after you've hit them for 260, even an ADP will get knocked out, so that's actually something really important to bear in mind here. You can, in theory, reach on some tag teams, and one of the other big tag teams of the format obviously is Mewtwo, and we are Psychic type, so we shouldn't have much trouble getting through those guys for sure. But in general, you're able to get through, pretty much every basic evolving V Pokemon, and you're comfortably two-shotting V Maxes even when you're sort of, by turn 2, hopefully you're attacking and doing sort of around that sort of 100 damage mark with the amount of tools that you found in the early turns. And then that can just max out to really good numbers later on. So yeah, I really do think this is a solid damage output for just 1 attachment. On top of that, it even has free retreat as well, so that can lead into a few nice synergistic options that we have in the deck. We are playing Bird Keepers in this list because it synergizes so well with Stellar Wish, and when you have free retreat with Whimsicott, it means you can just take advantage of that even more throughout the game, which is really a nice thing to bear in mind. For the other Pokemon then, we have a split of Jirachis. They share the same name, so we have to play 3 Stellar Wish and 1 Dreamy Revelation. I really like this split. We're not playing any Scoop Up Net in this deck, so we are just relying on Birdkeeper for pivoting our Stellar Wish Jirachis. But I do think this is still so worthwhile to have in those early turns. It can get us into Ball Search cards or supporters, and of course it can help us out getting tools throughout the game as well, as long as we are using Birdkeeper, so that's a really important thing to note. That's why I also have 1 copy of Dreamy Revelation in here, because you can always, naturally retreat as well. So if a Whimsicott's knocked out, you can go Stellar Wish into Birdkeeper into Dreamy Revelation, or Dreamy Revelation into Retreat into Stellar Wish into Birdkeeper, which gives you a lot of cards, basically, is what I'm trying to get at. And Stellar Wish is still, cherry-picking some really nice ones. Dreamy Revelation is something that you can do even without a Birdkeeper. You can just promote this in between every turn with a U-turn board naturally in hand after you've done a Flying Fury. And even we play Air Balloons in here as well, so plenty of ways to retreat our guys for this Jirachi specifically, so you can always get Dreamy Revelation value, which is really important because we are a little bit wary of hand disruption. Obviously, once our U-turn boards are discarded, they go straight back to our hand, so things like Marnies and Reset Stamps are, our biggest concern for the most part, outside of just traditionally prize racing. So having the recovery of Oricorio and these Jirachis really are going to be important. We do play 2 copies of Dedenne GX. Dedenne changing is still obviously very good for those early openings. This deck does ask a lot of you in those opening turns. Yes, it's only a 1 energy attacker for a stage 1, but you want to fill your board very quickly because you can't start putting tools down until you found the basics in the first place. So Dedenne, is adding to that basic count in general, but is also helping you draw towards more basics to fill out that board so we can have as many tool givers as possible for our damage output. We are playing one copy of Bench Barrier Mew, obviously very important with so many telescopic sight decks potentially roaming around in the format, as well as just the fact that Pikarom and Inteleon would be significantly more difficult, especially Cottonee with just 60 hit points. It would get slaughtered by Inteleon without the Mew, so an obvious include there, especially when you're always looking for any reason to put in more basics to this deck, because you want to establish Pokemon as quickly as possible so you can just have things to put tools on, basically. Otherwise, you may have to like research those tools away, and that can hurt your overall damage output later down the line. We are playing one copy of Latios GX, and this is something that I really think is something that can set the Whimsicott deck apart from a lot of the other one prizes in the format. One prizes have always said that, like, well, they've never really reached the highest echelons outside of maybe Control in the current format, and that's because of, ADP just flips that GX marker and only has to attack, 3 times into your one prize Pokemon, and that's like horrific. So having natural Psychic Energy in the deck, having naturally 7 cards that can help retreat your active Pokemon, means that you have really, really good access to Latios GX quickly. And obviously we play a lot of Ball Search cards to try and find our Pokemon ASAP as well. So yeah, plenty of ways we can get this Clear Vision off as quickly as possible. I think this should be more likely than previous builds of Malamar were able to get Latios into play. Haven't really done like serious number crunching, but we play like 6 basic Psychics, which is really good access to it. A lot of Ball Search cards. Dedenne, which is like a big thing that Latios never really had. Or sorry, that Malamar never really had. So you have more dig potential than most early game Malamar players. So for anyone who played Malamar and tried to Clear Vision against ADP, I think this will be more likely to get it off, especially with the amount of switch outs that we have compared to the Malamar players. So yeah, I really like this option against ADP. Puts you on a fair playing field when normally you wouldn't be attacking anyway, because you are looking for that stage 1 to get damage into play. But yeah, this Latios certainly can serve as a nice option. One other thing to note as well, Mew obviously is a 1 energy attacking threat that can finish things off if Flying Fury is just out of range. You know how I said that Horror Psychic Energy can be a way to get yourself in range of an ADP. Mew could also do a similar role, either by Psy-powering early or later on to finish things off if you're falling just short of numbers. Just a quick thing to note of there. And finally, we have an Oricorio GX, Dance of Tribute, just a fantastic ability that I've used more and more in this developing format. I really do feel like getting those extra cards post-Marnie and post-Reset Stamp are going to be super important for you, because these are the things that you're most afraid of as you approach that late game, that your damage output can just be taken away from you as all your U-turn boards and all your other tools that you're accumulating to your hand just kind of get thrown back into the deck. So those are all things to bear in mind. Yes, we have Psych Energy, so in theory you can get these attacks off, but they are way too expensive to work towards, as you'd expect that your 90 hit point Whimsicott are basically always going down. Onto the trainers then, we play 2 copies of Ornery Rod. Like I said, we play a low energy count, but at the same time, we also need to continually recover our Pokemon. So again, we maintain a full board all the time, so we can get the maximum output from the Whimsicott. Like I said again, we play a lot of Ball Search. We're playing 2 Com, 3 Greats, and 4 Quick Ball. I'm hoping this gives us a lot of access to our Pokemon as quickly as possible, so that we can make use of the 15 tools that you can see on the screen as well, again, as quickly as possible. You never want to be researching these cards away. It would be a huge pain for that to be the case, because you're effectively losing damage output. So a lot of the time you want to make the most of these as quickly as possible. So the Ball Search cards are certainly going to make that happen for you. Then we are playing 3 copies of Air Balloon, 4 U-turn boards, 4 Vitality Bands, and 4 Lucky Eggs. All of them, in theory, can just be blank cards that are basically doing 40 times damage whenever you put them into play. But there's obvious upside here. Like I said, the amount of U-turn board and Air Balloon we have gives us good access to Latios and good ways of protecting our Whimsicotts in the early turns as we retreat into Jirachis to get Stellar Wish value or to get Dreamy Revelation going. That Vitality Band tick of 10 damage, like I said, can really help out in all sorts of different situations. And if it's protecting a tool here and there, obviously that's going to be handy. Yes, you can discard the Vitality Band with the effect of Whimsicott and get that extra 10 damage. It will work for you because you do the discard effect after you calculate damage. So yes, very good card to have in the deck. And the Lucky Eggs are a super good deal if ever you can afford to do less than 240 or 250, I should say. You get to hold a Lucky Egg on your active, and then you're protecting, you're making your hand more versatile. Obviously, if they don't reset stamp you or whatever, those U-turn boards are clogging up the hand quite often. But really, it's just that protection against your opponents, I should say, stamping, and then you really have nothing else to work with if they take the KO. So the Lucky Egg is going to try and protect you in that scenario when you're not having to do the maximum damage output, which, you know, in plenty of situations like bossing up to Dedennes, etc., you can just remove your U-turn boards and be happy with that. So yeah, Lucky Egg is going to be really nice in that regard. Onto the supporters then, we are playing 3 copies of Boss. Like I said, reaching on Dedennes, reaching on Eldegoss, Crobat, those sorts of cards shouldn't be too much of an issue for you, as long as you have found your U-turn boards effectively. So having 3 Boss is going to be important there. We are playing 4 copies of Birdkeeper. It's the only way that I can retreat Latios Jirachi if it's napping. So you do want to maximize this count as much as you can. I also just like that it's growing that hand size. When you have Oricorio, when you have Lucky Egg, when you have so much Dreamy Oracle and Dreamy Revelation and Stellar Wish, you want to continue to grow the hand, and it's really only Birdkeeper and Sinlin that can do that. But the Birdkeeper has the obvious switch upside, and you already have free retreat on Jirachi. On Whimsicott. I'm getting my words all mixed up, but you can always just free retreat your Whimsicott. And then get a free Stellar Wish and Birdkeeper back into that Whimsicott. It's got so much synergy here. It's like an insane card to have in the deck. It's probably one of the best Birdkeeper decks I've seen, to be honest. It's one of the best users of this card. And then we have 4 Research as well. Obvious early game, so much dig that it's going to be really useful for you. You can obviously establish as many tools as possible pre-research as well if you really want to get further into the deck. So we have a lot of insta-play as long as you find your Pokemon in the first instance. So that's always the first hurdle of the deck. Finally, then, we are playing 6 energy cards, 4 of them being Horror Psychic, that damage output that you can get on top of your already, very decent 2-shot ability can really tip you over, and I just think there's no reason really not to play this when you're expecting most energies to be removed immediately anyway. And having 2 basic Psychic in the deck, obviously very decent, because we are playing 2 Ordinary Rods to try and loop these as well. That's going to be important for you against other one-prize matchups. Onto the full list then, we are playing 17 Pokemon, 37 trainers, and 6 energy. I have thought about a couple things here, potentially more tool cards, potentially more Pokemon, because again, I'm petrified of just not having enough Pokemon in play in the first instance, that you're then like wasting your tools because you're having to research them away, etc. So those are the things I'm most afraid of. So if you are thinking about extra Pokemon, there's certainly things like Orangaroos that you could be playing. You think about even adding in like a Cincino line, Snorlax, those sorts of things. As we get onto the tech options now, that's really exactly what I'm thinking. You could just look to have more Pokemon in general. I initially had like a 2-2 line of Cincino in here just to have more basics, essentially, and more comm synergy so that you had as early access as possible to Pokemon, because although this is all about the tools, you can't put your tools down unless you got your Pokemon into play. So you really are trying to flood that board as quickly as possible. So any basic Pokemon that gives you slight upside, the likes of Snorlax, the likes of Orangaroo, they're all super worth considering, because just any Pokemon anytime you're happy to see in those opening turns, because it gets you closer to filling your board, which is obviously very good. There's also the Unified Minds Whimsicott that has the Prowl ability that can get you any one card from your deck. Could be a great way, alongside Scoop Up Net, if you wanted to go down that direction, to give yourself, again, some minor stamp proofing here and there. It would eat into your overall attacker count, but if you're already committed to playing 2 Ordinary Rods anyway, I think you might be able to get away with it. Something I haven't really experimented with too much, but it could be an interesting option for sure. Additional damage modifiers like Leon, Galarian, Zigzagoon I can certainly see working in your favor, but I'm still kind of skeptical of how much setup this deck is going to be working around and how often you want to be continually drawing for tools. Giant Bomb's a card that I initially did have in the deck and thought it was like a no-brainer. It can do one of those situations where you do like 210 into VMAXs and then you have a Horror Psychic and a Giant Bomb attached and your opponent's put in a really, really sticky situation. But that's kind of like the big dream, and throughout your first turn, Giant Bomb is essentially wasted. You just put it on your active and hope that it blows up on them, but many decks don't attack you on turn 1 because VMAXs are evolving on turn 2 and ADP is not attacking you for the first 3 turns. So in general, it finds its way into the discard pile, basically just way more than the other tools that we have in the deck. So in general, it ends up losing you more damage than it'll actually work and like blow up. Especially because, you know, the ADPs and the VMAX decks out there, they're all playing like a really high count of boss. So getting around this Giant Bomb shouldn't be too difficult. So if you want to experiment, I would say like 2 Giant Bombs and, you know, lowering the Vitality Band or Air Balloon counts is something you certainly can experiment with. But I am skeptical of going full 4 Giant Bomb because there will be too many turns where you just lose that damage output altogether because it's discarding itself before you're attacking with Whimsicott in the first place. So that's the only reason why I'm not playing Giant Bomb. But I do like how the math works out when you are attacking with Whimsy, especially when you have a Horror Psychic Energy attached. That could be very effective and awkward for people to deal with. And finally, the obvious potential include of Garbodor, also in the new set, that has a Twin Energy Trash Cyclone attack that can do 30 times each tool in your discard pile. I actually think we just don't play enough tools, especially because U-turn board is getting itself back unless you're like researching it away, for example. Garbodor's output actually, sometimes is low, and also I think having to merge in like at least a 2/2 line of Garbodor and at least 3 Twin Energies eats into like so many of your consistency spaces. Now, that said, I wouldn't mind having some Trubbishes in the deck because it would be extra basics, but the rest of the cards are just potentially more times where you can stumble. The real upside of Garbodor is that you're protecting yourself from, again, stamps and all that sort of stuff, because in that late game, all you really need is like to find a Twin Energy and you can do a decent chunk, and 30 multiplier isn't a low amount by any means. But I think just the sacrifices that you're making in the early turns are probably too big. So at the moment, I'm preferring spaces just committed to the general game plan of Whimsicott and drawing as many cards as possible. I may end up being wrong, and Garbodor may just be too important to not play in terms of the late game reach. It really does depend on how much disruption ends up being in the format, how many decks are super stamp reliant, how many decks are playing a high Marnie count. Currently in the format, Marnie is like a 2 count at most in ADP. It's not often played in Eternatus. Like Mewtwo and Pikarom are playing Stamp, but there aren't that many other decks doing so. So I do think that like obviously against any Welder deck, you're not too worried about Stamp. Sometimes Center Scorch plays like 1 or 2, but yeah, I think a lot of the time, like there are so many turns where you can get away with it, that we can just play a streamlined Whimsicott build without needing the Garbodor. But there's obvious strengths here. It's kind of like exactly your last 2 prizes that you look towards Garbodor, and I don't know if it's worth committing like 7 minimum spaces to exactly the last 2 prizes of the game. Now, obviously, the last 2 are the most important 2, so like I said, it could be wrong, and I'm sure there are going to be some mix and match builds. But keep an eye out for Garbodor, because I'm going to be making a Garbodor exclusive list as well that's trying to discard as many cards as possible every single turn with the likes of Hapus and Cincinnos, and just go all out on Garbodor as well. So keep an eye out for that list coming soon. Onto the matchup overview. I do think I've been quite generous here, but basically it's because, in theory, you are this 1 prize deck that only needs to put down a couple 2 prize Pokemon throughout the game, and you can, in theory, trade up quite nicely. You can one-shot a Pikarom, in theory, as well. You can do all this sort of stuff. I've said Picarom's a bad matchup only because of Vikavolt, by the way. You're not allowed to put your tools down against item lock, so that would be a horrific matchup. You basically insta-scoop to item lock. You have to try and attack with your Oricorio GX, which isn't ideal. And 1v1ing a Vikavolt isn't very easy for that attacker. So that's the only reason why I've said that's a bad matchup. But in general, like, we're happy to see Mewtwo's, obviously. I think you're okay against ADP as long as you go the Latios game plan. Now, certainly there are those situations where they go second and get to GX on turn 1. But in those situations, you're hoping to be as pure 1 prize as possible. Try and not put down a Dedenne and an Oricorio. Obviously, be mindful of more wilds as well. Against the Eternatuses, the Center Scorches, you're hoping that traditional prize trade is just going to be in your favor. Against the other 1 prize decks, I don't think we're that far off. I think in general we should be able to keep pace with them because the damage output that we require is so low. We really don't need to find that many tools to be trading 1 for 1 on them, and we have the help of Lucky Egg, the Jirachis, to maintain those attackers quite efficiently. It's only really things like Dragapult, which we would be scared of the bench damage. Attacking Excadrill probably is going to be trading, and they're more Puritan 1 prize than you are for the most part, and they are very, very effective at taking out Dedennes and stuff like that. We may be a little bit more reliant on those than Excadrill. Zarude Rillaboom is a healing archetype, so as long as they're able to heal around their Rillaboom and undo a lot of our damage, it could be a little bit awkward for us. Orbital Spread, I believe, again, especially if they are playing Zarude for healing, they would be doing a lot of removal, and the Orbital would be getting a lot of value because you have to fill your board to do good damage output, so you can't not commit into their spread attacks. And, we can try and loop on Mew as much as possible, but they can always gust it, and there'll be turns where you aren't able to re-establish Mew, and you're going to get really, really punished. And Donphan Spiritomb, I think you're probably just a little bit slower than. Oftentimes that 70 hit points of your early game Jirachis and whatnot are going to be punished quite quickly by Spiritombs, so I would certainly be a little bit concerned of that. Obviously, if they are playing Spike Muff and that sort of package and not being the full Donphan list. If they are going full Donphan, it feels pretty 50-50. You're both setup based, so yeah, that should be a close one, I would say. The reason why I haven't put like Mad Party or of these other one prize decks as like necessarily unfavored is because I think they oftentimes have to put down multiple 2 prizes as well, and I think we're pretty good at catching those 2 prize Pokemon off the bench as well, especially in those matchups where you don't need to throw away excess tools if you don't need to. So I feel that's a pretty fair game, and we're naturally one of the more consistent 1 prize decks as well, compared to the likes of like Cramorant, for example. I think it shouldn't be a huge problem for us. So my closing thoughts are I'm really happy to see Latios GX actually have a home in the format again. It's not really been able to be played since like Malamar. I know some Mewtwo players have used it, but it's been sort of sparingly used for a while. So seeing this card come back into the format is kind of good. We really need to find more ways of being able to play 1 prize decks outside of this GX attack, but for now this is the best we can do. So we just kind of have to applaud the fact that this is usable in the deck, really, and just have a bit of sigh of relief that that is possible. And I do think in general this is not the most difficult deck to build around. You know, you're just trying to get as many Pokemon into play as possible, as quickly as possible, so then you're able to put your tools down. And the only real nuances come in those moments where you can spare some damage to try and establish Lucky Egg to protect yourself. Obviously, that your opponent can't Marnie and Boss in the same turn to remove your Lucky Egg. Obviously, they can Stamp and they can Marnie and Scrapper, or they can Stamp and Boss. So there are ways around this sort of thing, but it just makes more combo pieces, and it means that in general you're not just getting hard countered by like the odd Marnie here and there. I feel like you should be able to reestablish your damage output like relatively well, especially because it feels like when you're a 1 prizer that can reach in the plus 200s, you only really need like 1 or 2 of those power spike turns to be ahead in a prize race. We've basically seen that from Mad Party in every matchup that isn't ADP, and this is basically trying to fill those same shoes, but with the option of Latios GX that hopefully should be quite consistent. Let me know what you guys thought about Whimsicott. Have you tried to play it this way? Have you always thought about it going alongside Garbodor? If you are a big believer of Garbodor, I'd like to hear that discussion in the comment section below as well. For now, though, I've tried to make it as simple as possible, and that's always my main shtick here. Just make the deck work in the first instance, and think about the power level, 1 time out of 10, a little bit less so. But that's it for today's video, guys. I hope you did enjoy, and I will see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.